Hello, Mike.
Good evening, Mohit. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Fantastic. So another Thursday today, and this is going to be another magical day. I'm telling you, this is fantastic. People are just loving it. You know,
Yeah.
your information, your webinars, absolutely wonderful. Hello, Garan. Oh, nice to see you again. How are you doing, Garan? Yeah, we missed seeing you in India this year. I hope you're well. Amit, how are you doing? Mahendra? Oh, greetings from Mount Abu. Oh, fantastic. We've got our green avatar man here.
Yeah, we were there virtually a week ago.
Yeah. So this is fantastic. Absolutely wonderful. Welcome, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We've got many people coming in, so we're going to give a few more minutes before we get started. Richard, good evening. Good afternoon. Salil, Brian. Hey, Brian, how are you?
All a bit cold for them there, I think.
Yes,
Worcester,
yes,
yeah.
yes. And we have somebody from Meghalaya, our friend from Meghalaya. Deepak is here. Amanda, how are you, Amanda? Good to see you. And we've got Fareen, we've got Amit, lots of friends here. Fantastic. This is going to be good fun. So, friends, in case if you find, the internet's been erratic. So if we do go off, you don't go anywhere because I will reinstate the system, reboot it, and we'll be back in less than a minute. So just in case if it happens, stay on, don't go anywhere, and we would start right where we finished. And Mike, the number of people are increasing. I'm happy.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, nice to see Kelly there again.
Yes, yes, Kelly. How are you doing? I hope your dad's well. Fantastic. Okay, good. So, Mike, I'm going to introduce you and introduce myself to those who don't know us. Uh, Although I think most people would know us. Let me
There's
just
several familiar names, but I'm sure there's a few new there as well.
yes, absolutely. Um, let me just talk about why we are doing this webinar. We're doing this series of webinars because Mike and I believe that this is the best time to get across to people and share our knowledge and our experiences, what we've done for the cause of conservation of birds, the things that we enjoy doing. And, as field people, it's very important to bring our stories, our experiences to you and share them with you. Each one of you have been to many jungles or many forests, and you've been birding as well, and you got your stories. So I'm sure there's a lot of cohesion between each and everything that you will hear from us. So we will talk about photography, ecotourism, conservation, rare species. It also adding dimension of rural empowerment. There will be information for advanced birders, for beginners, something about our tours, techniques, best practices, many such things. So, Mike, since you are the expert, you're going to unfold your magic today as well. Let me introduce you. So, friends, ever since his childhood in England, Mike has been fascinated with watching birds and recording and documenting bird sightings. Mike lived in Delhi in the year 2002. He was a very active member of Delhi Bird Club and also contributed to the Atlas of the Birds of Delhi and Haryana. After he moved to Bangalore, he got interested in exploring sites that weren't visited so frequently. He worked for Bird Count India to help promote Indian birding and especially high quality data recording. He's also an eBird reviewer for India. His interest in bird recording and migration led to short-term assignment with BTO. Each week he would check the BBC weather pages to find out what the weather had been like in Britain, so he could write an article discussing recent bird occurrences. And there's a lot more which you'll hear from Mike directly. And I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Mohit Aggarwal. I'm blessed with 4 children, a son and a daughter, out of which 2 are non-humans. One is a Labrador, and the other one is an escapee African grey. He landed at a friend's office, and from somewhere, and this friend of mine couldn't find the owner. And a month later, he says, "Mohit, would you like to look after him?" I said, "Sure." So I got him home, and he came here. So I spoke to him. I said, "Look, I'm going to be a friend, and you're going to be my friend, and you're going to be here as long as I live." So now we're friends, and he flies around all day long, sits on people's shoulders, and that's what he does. So professionally, I'm an experiential ecotourism specialist with deep love for nature. I help people travel to some wonderful places in Asia. I'm the founder of Asian Adventures, a 26-year-old travel company. The company is on a large mission to help Asian elephants with the corridors, free the Himalayas of plastic waste, and help small wildlife NGOs, and also save the ancient Himalayan shrines. My interest is to promote ecotourism in the real sense and convert every tourist to an ecotourist. So that's a bit about me. I've spent 4 minutes doing all this. Now over to you, Mike. I'm not going to take your time away.
Thank you very much, Mohit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome again, everyone. Hope you're enjoying this, our virtual tour birding in different areas of India, especially those who are in the really cold weather. I see been a bit of fun in Britain the last week, I'm sure. Anyway, here in Bangalore, as usual, I'm just sitting here with my shorts on because the weather's always like this. Anyway, enough about that. Let's go to Gujarat today. So we last week, for those of you who were there, we're in Rajasthan. Rajasthan and Gujarat are fairly similar in many ways, both with some really spectacular, especially winter birding in India. So today we'll have a look at Gujarat and on the west coast. So we're south of Rajasthan, and it's incredibly diverse for habitats. So we have actually part of the Western Ghats reaches as far as Gujarat, not very often birded. That must be quite interesting, I'm sure. But then you have areas of Kutch, which is the salt desert areas, deciduous forest, so places like Gir for its forests, and a lot of really good wetlands. So the diversity, the habitat diversity is great. The bird diversity is obviously excellent. So very quickly looking at the map, the most obvious things up there are in the top, the green area there, which is Kutch, the salt desert, the greater run of Kutch and little run of Kutch, and the bit of red down in the bottom is the Western Ghats. So what we're doing today, starting from Ahmedabad in the sort of northeast, as you can see on that map, where you can come down from Rajasthan. So Rajasthan is just off the top of this map. Well, there's a couple of main routes people tend to do in Gujarat. One which is heading west, which takes in the little Rann of Kutch and the greater Rann of Kutch. And the other one is doing the southern area, going down to Gir and visiting some other places on the way, which we'll take you to in a few minutes. But just first, a little bit, Ahmedabad. As a little trivial fact, most people think Ahmedabad, which is the largest city in Gujarat, happens to be the state capital, but it isn't. The state capital is actually the new planned city of Gandhinagar, not very far away from it. But there you are, it's a good one for your trivia pub quiz. So it's actually got a lot going for it, a lot of cultural significance in Ahmedabad. There's the city on the Sabarmati River. It's the 5th largest city in India by population. Lots of interesting sites if you're into non-birds. The elaborate kind of step wells, of which you get lots in Gujarat. This one's particularly famous in Ahmedabad. If you're into textiles, the Calico Museum is world famous for an incredible collection of old textiles, and we'll see some more of that because there's a lot of interesting craft in Gujarat as well. You might have guessed from me mentioning Gandhinagar that Gandhi spent a major part of his life was from Gujarat. So you can visit the Sabarmati Ashram, where he spent several years before he set off on the Salt March. And some of the festivals, Navratri, which is a big Hindu festival, is extremely big in Gujarat. It means 9 nights. So if you happen to be around in September, October, there'll be a lot happening all over Gujarat. And of course, there's the food. I couldn't do a presentation without talking about the food. Unfortunately, I suppose for a lot of our visitors from the West, Gujarat is almost entirely vegetarian and is officially a dry state, so there's no alcohol. But never mind, the food that is there is great, and the birds more than make up for it. So there's some dokla in the middle. You see that in very Gujarat speciality. Various pakoras on the right. Teplas at the bottom, all a sort of chapati type thing with methi, fenugreek. So anyway, lots of good street food and snacks to have. But anyway, we're here for the birds. So birding can start very close to Ahmedabad. Thol Lake is an artificial lake, but as I said, in the winter, some of these places get huge numbers of migrants. So Thol in particular is very good for cranes, and you have all 3 of the species. The Saras resident in quite large numbers there, in sort of double figures, 20, 30 even, and common and demoiselle cranes, which winter in large numbers here. So the typical view of Thol, and in fact many of the northwest Indian wetlands in the winter are stacked full of birds. Lots of ducks, lots of geese, flamingos, pelicans, some brilliant winter birding in a lot of northwest India. Dalmatian pelican is one bird that is the scarcer of the pelicans here. Great white is commoner, but areas of Gujarat get good numbers. And here's the Saras cranes that I mentioned. Now, some of these areas, Thol gets some of these birds, but where there are drier areas, so things like the acacia scrub around, in much of northwest India, you can find yellow-crowned woodpecker, a small pied woodpecker. White-eared bulbul is a common bulbul in the arid areas. Used to be known as white-cheeked bulbul before it was split, and the Himalayan one that you might know, which has a sort of a forward-pointing crest on top of its head, otherwise it's quite similar, and the white-eared bulbul was split from that. And Rufous fronted prunier, another bird of arid sort of desert areas in the northwest predominantly, and a few other places in India. And also, it's more of a passage migrant. Some in the winter is the Sykes's warbler. Sykes's warbler and booted warbler, both of which move through the northwest and then winter further south in India mainly, are incredibly difficult to identify. One of the most difficult pairs of species to identify there is. I'm fairly confident this one's a Sykes's warbler, but they're much easier when you watch them moving around. In a still photo, they can be extremely difficult to be sure. Not too far, continuing into Gujarat, is Nal Sarovar, which is another wetland. It's a huge wetland, largest in Gujarat, and it really has some fantastic winter birding. A lot of the birds, same as Thol, generally more birds, pratt coals as well, Stalisca's bush chat in the dry area. And in fact, for some of you Indian birders might know that there's been quite a few people twitching to Nal Sarovar recently. Because at the moment you can see red-breasted goose, which I think is the 3rd record for India, and Namaquadove as well, which is the 2nd or 3rd again, I think. The first time there's been a male. So red-breasted goose, a goose from sort of Eastern Europe, Namaquadove from Africa. So 2 extremely rare birds there at the moment. So you can take a boat across on the rather serene waters of Nal Sarovar. It's a lake and an extensive area of sort of marshes around the lake. Flamingos are quite common. Greater flamingo common in lots of places in big flocks. We'll go on a little bit more to flamingos later. Gujarat is probably the best place in India for flamingos. And lesser flamingos as well, which are present there. So lesser is the rarer generally. Both species do breed in Gujarat, but almost nowhere else in India, or certainly not regularly. And in fact, these don't always breed either. It's very subject to the water levels in the run of Kutch. Kutch is where they breed. and cranes in huge numbers in much of Gujarat. We saw demoiselle cranes last week when we were in Rajasthan at Kichan. Here's another flock of them. Both demoiselle and common cranes occur through much of Gujarat. So northwest India generally, with Rajasthan, are a really vital wintering ground for both species, especially demoiselles, which don't winter in too many other places. So for waders, this area is fantastic. So Pacific golden plover is one of the very long distance migrants breeding up in northern Asia and to Alaska. It's one that unfortunately, like many of these waders, have suffered severe declines. So in India, we've recognised about an 80% decline in wintering populations, probably because of problems elsewhere. So loss of habitat on their migration routes through China, for example, the Yellow Sea area. But it's becoming more of a scarce bird wintering in India. Small pratincoles, really nice bird. You can find in quite big flocks sometimes. So small pratincole is resident in India, although it tends to wander around quite a lot. But also in Nalsarovar especially, it's probably the only place where you can see both collared and oriental pratincoles together. It's a bit tricky to tell from this photo, but actually there's both of them in this image. Not very easy to tell. The white trailing edge to the secondaries that you can see on some fairly obviously is a good feature for collared pratincole. But they're, again, tricky birds to identify, and if you just go around with your simple field guide to India, you find they don't really give enough detail, because people have understood a bit more about praticole identification and realised that it's a little bit more complicated than people first thought. Anyway, collared pratincole, which breeds in sort of Central Asia areas more, winters in this area. Oriental pratincole is different because it does breed here. And migration of oriental pratincole wasn't really very understood until fairly recently, and it proved to be an amazing migrant. They do winter in India, but it seems that most of them don't. Most of them come here to breed. And there's even a satellite tagged bird from Australia, which is their biggest wintering areas, which was found nesting in Karnataka, southern India. So it's one of the very few birds that migrates from Australia to India. So moving on south now, we're going to a different habitat completely, Velavadar, which is the Blackbuck National Park. Quite similar to some of the places we looked at in Rajasthan, like Tal Chapa being a grassland, and unfortunately a very small grassland. There's not many of these areas that are safe and protected. Velavadar is one of them. It's very good for Indian wolf, jackal, and in particular, its roost in the winter of harriers. Now, it's not as spectacular as it used to be years ago, I think. I don't know what the numbers are like, but when I visited I think it was in the early 2000s, I spent one evening in the grassland there with harriers just hanging around, dropping into the grasslands. There were about 1,500 pallid and Montagu's harriers. And they included, I think, about 500 just in the air around me at one time, roosting there. So it's just a really amazing sight. So this is a sort of habitat of grassland with large numbers of blackbuck, which is what the sanctuary was actually formed to protect. And you can take your jeep around through these areas. So it also in the monsoon time, Velavadar is one of the few sites that gets numbers of lesser floricans breeding. Here's some of the harriers, Montagues, which is very common, and pallid, which is equally very common in winter here. It's good for raptors in general. Red-necked falcon is a bird that crows throughout all of peninsular India, but is never very easy to see. In fact, it's often one of the birds that people want to see, and even living here all this time, I just don't know any reliable place to see them. You see them once every several months, but never in the same place. They'll come up in a different place next time. Quails in this grasslands, it's a good place to see common quail, especially wintering. Rain quail is common in the monsoons and probably migrates further south in the winter, but we don't really know because they're too difficult to identify most of the time, and you don't get views like this too often. And larks, so the rufous-tailed lark is a really nice resident lark. And then on the mammals, so jackal, which is quite common in Valavadar and some of the other places there, but it's always worth looking carefully at your jackals, and particularly look for ones that are quite long-legged and have pale white eyes, which is the wolf, the Indian wolf. The Indian wolf is a subspecies of grey wolf. It's obviously quite slender. It doesn't have the thick coat that you think of wolves from elsewhere because it doesn't need them in the winters here. And striped hyena. This is one of the best places to see hyena in India. In fact, that trip I was mentioning, my first trip there a long ago, after I'd enjoyed my harrier roost one evening, and I went out birding through the park the next morning, I managed to see my first ever wolf and my first ever hyena within about half an hour of each other. If you fancy not staying in a comfortable but fairly basic place near the national park, you could stay here. This is one of the converted heritage hotels in Neelambag, not too far away from Valavadar. Actually, you notice the car that they have parked there. There's a lot of really interesting vintage cars in Gujarat. I think the Maharaja of Gondal in particular collected them, so you can actually go and visit his collection of hundreds of vintage cars throughout the years. And of course, some good street food here. This is one that Salil, who I think is probably on this call, who helped put most of this presentation together, persuaded me to eat them when we were in Rajasthan recently. Mirchi bhaji, for those who don't know, is basically a deep fried green chili. But it's lovely and it's not too spicy all the way up to when we had them. So Gir is probably the most famous place for most people in Gujarat. Gir National Park is the only place in the world where you can see the Asiatic lion, subspecies of the main lion. So this is why people would come. There's also fantastic birding here in this dry, deciduous forest. So this is a sort of forest. This is near the lodge. You can take jeep safaris into the park, but also the birding just outside is excellent. And of course, this is main target there, the Asiatic lion. Compared to African lions, it's got less of a thick mane, and it has an unusual fold of skin under the belly you can see running down there, which African lions don't have. So it used to be present from North Africa, Northwest Africa, all the way through the Middle East, through to India, and I think quite a lot further in east in India, into Bihar and even close to Calcutta, I think. But hunting pressures have reduced it so that now they are only found in Gir itself. The numbers there were very low. They've recovered a bit, so I think they're thought to be about 600 or so there. But they are clearly very endangered. It's the only population, so there's always a risk of an environmental disaster like forest fires and hot summers can cause a big problem. Disease running through the population. So for years, it's been talked about relocating a population of lions to, in particular, a place in Madhya Pradesh that has habitat suitable for them. I don't know the current status of that because the Gujarat government, I think, were never very happy that they'd lose their uniqueness as the only place for lions. So it's not yet happened anyway. As well as lion, you have another one of the big cats, which is also quite regularly seen here. So leopards are reasonably plentiful. More nocturnal, so they're not as often seen as the lions, but there's plenty of them in the park here. Also in the outskirts, so there's a lot of the problems with lions is that a lot of them move out, especially now with more numbers, into neighbouring villages, and so there are a lot of potential conflict with humans and villagers around. And if you're really, really lucky, because this is much more difficult to see than the bigger cats, it's not a bad place to find rusty spotted cat, which is well, definitely the smallest cat in Asia. It's one of the smallest cats in the world. Really interesting, cat, but absolutely nocturnal, so not very often seen. It's actually present throughout most of India. So if you go to any of the parks, they're there, but your chances of seeing them are next to nil. There was one photographed actually in lockdown period from someone, I think at the Gear Birding Lodge. But some nocturnal animals, birds, are not so nocturnal, thankfully. Mottled wood owl, which is a really nice medium-sized owl. This is nocturnal, but quite often found in the daytime at roosts. And Gir is probably the most reliable place in India to see it. Nightjars roosting as well. There's a good chance here. This is an Indian nightjar. And Gujarat generally is the stronghold for many of the vultures, or at least white-rump vulture and Indian vulture in India, with populations obviously crashed everywhere. Gujarat is holding on to reasonable numbers, and populations seem to be fairly stable, but they're still critically endangered and at great risk. Painted sandgrouse is a really nice sandgrouse that you can see in parts around Gir. They come in to drink, but really they leave it very dark. They come in so just as it's completely dark almost, so you could do well to see them clearly sometimes. Chestnut-bellied sandgrouse you see in lots of places, and they're much more active in the day. Tickle's blue flycatcher, common bird of these sort of deciduous forests. A really smart flycatcher, and you'll definitely see that around Gir. And tawny-bellied babbler is slightly more difficult to see, but this is one of the northern subspecies. The ones that I see a little bit around Bangalore area have a white throat and a little bit paler. So two different subspecies we get through India. Gir Birding Lodge is the place to stay when you're in Gir. This was set up by Mohit probably about 20 years ago now, before Gir was really visited very much. So it wasn't a popular destination. Now it's quite popular for tourism generally, and especially lion watching. The Gir Birding Lodge has excellent birding in and around the lodge. In fact, I don't know if you remember, Mohit, but I was your first guest there. I think about a week before you opened. You weren't quite ready, but I managed to stay there anyway.
Yes, we needed some guinea pigs there.
Exactly, yeah. I hope it's improved a little. The room wasn't so good. I hope you fixed it by now.
We had tents there, remember?
That's right.
Without people around.
So this is lodge. That wasn't there when I was there. But yeah, lovely place to stay. Employs a lot of as most of Mohit's places, a lot of the local community involved here. And they'll serve you things like this, wonderful Gujarati thali, lots of different tasty dishes. So that definitely worth trying. So the this area Gir is home to this particular community, the Maldari community, of sort of pastoral groups, both Hindu and Muslim, and they look after livestock in this area. I think most of them have actually been resettled outside the park, which has led to a lot of recovery of the habitat inside the park. Some more colourful Maldaris. Nsidi is another community in this area. They're descended from Africans who thought maybe they came over as slaves or mercenaries years ago. Were quite successful in business. Actually now they'll give you these, they're well known for their dance performances, music performances. So you can get to see some of that if you're staying in this area. Not too far from Gir is the famous Somnath temple, about 1,000-year-old, except it would be if it hadn't been destroyed multiple times over the years. So this is not quite so old now, but it's right on the coast, a spectacular area. And speaking of the coast and spectacular birding and waders in particular, Jamnagar is the hub or the centre for a lot of the coastal birding in Gujarat. It's home to the Marine National Park, also a lot of freshwater habitats, so huge variety of birds, and winter birding especially is brilliant. Passage time is really nice as well. So probably one of the best places in India for waders especially, and with a few key birds as well. You'll see flocks of western reef herons. There's a nice mix of dark phase and white phase western reef herons. Yeah, there's a typical view in this area. This picture has mostly great white pelicans, but painted storks. That's what we got there. A few double-glossy ibis. So huge mixed flocks of water birds in this area. And waders, it's fantastic for. So you can search through, have a look through the flocks of waders. This is a flock mostly of great knots, which is another long distance migrant that has suffered a lot with numbers declining because of habitat on their migratory route. So this is mostly great knots here. There's Terex sandpipers, there's ruddy turnstone. But if you look closely amongst these waders and you scan through them, you might find something interesting like this particular one. So this is a great knot. And again, this one's part of a tagging project. You see the bands it has on the right leg. Coloured bands so that if you're a bird watcher and you see them, you can easily see the pattern of colours. There's a green tag above an orange tag here, and that will tell the researchers which particular bird it actually was. There's no need to catch the bird and read a number on the ring. And interesting thing with this particular one is this great knot. This photograph itself is actually from Mumbai or near Mumbai in November last year. But this bird was actually tagged just 2 months before that. It was ringed in late August in China, in northeast China on the border with North Korea. So it had come as a juvenile. So his first migratory journey was to northwest India, and that's a journey of 5,000 to 6,000 kilometers direct that it had done now. There is an oyster catcher. Is not a common bird in India. Find these on some of the coastal areas, but mostly around the Jamnagar area. Ruddy turnstone, very familiar to those people from watching from Europe, but again, it's an exciting bird for Indian birders, present again around quite a lot on the coast. Curlews and whimbrels. So in India, we don't really get that much exposure to waders like our European birder friends and many of our American birder friends. So we're not quite so used to them. So this area is fantastic for spending. India, a bit longer bill than most of the European birds. You can see here the whimbrel on the right has a shorter bill and the strong head pattern, brown crown stripe, lateral crown stripe, brown eye stripe, and more prominent supercilium. Both birds are fairly common on the coast. And another fun comparison, trickier one this time, lesser sandplovers and greater sandplovers, both of which are fairly common, a lot of the coast, especially in the northwest. Lesser sandplovers especially, lesser sandplover on the left. Greater sandplover, sometimes not too difficult to identify, but they do vary in size and sometimes almost impossible. So on these particular two, the greater sandplover has a larger bill, but it's pretty subtle here. There's not a lot of difference in the bill size. Slightly longer, it looks slightly thinner. But some subtle features. The greater sandplover has a less rounded head. You see the head shape on lesser sandplover is quite rounded. Greater sandplover is a bit more angular, a bit more square ahead. And the clearest feature on these two birds, which is not always consistent though, is the paler legs on the greater sandplover. But if you're lucky, you see them together and the size difference can be obvious, but not always easy. But this is the key bird that people are looking for around Jamnagar especially, crab plover. Crab plover is one of those birds that is unique. It has its own family. So there is only one species in the family, crowned plover. It breeds mostly in the Arabian Peninsula and the winter in East Africa, and then a few come over to northwest India, really mostly around the Jamnagar area, where you can get flocks of several hundred, and then really scarce elsewhere on the coast further south of India. But as I said, it's unique because it has its own family. It's also quite unusual. It's not really a plover. I think it's more closely related to coursers, but it nests in a burrow that it digs itself, the only shorebird to dig a nest burrow. Indian skimmer is another bird you have a chance of seeing in Jamnagar. It doesn't breed here, but it's present nearly throughout the year, so they disappear. Where these ones go exactly to breed, we don't really know, but it can be seen here post-breeding and then through to the spring. And another bird that breeds here is great-crested grebe, and this Jamnagar area is pretty much the only place in India outside of Kashmir where great-crested grebes breed. It's a winter visitor in parts of North India, not especially common, but does breed here. This is the Marine National Park that I mentioned. It's a fantastic landscape and brilliant for marine wildlife. You can have a look around while you're wading around. If you can distract yourself from the waders, look for things like this spot octopus or pufferfish. And interestingly, actually, just before I got on this call, I saw a photo someone sent round of an osprey carrying a pufferfish, which I've never seen before. It was a nice round, puffed-out pufferfish. And turtles are around here. You'd be lucky to see them, but this is a green sea turtle. So then to Bhuj. Now Bhuj is going further west. This is now we're into Kutch district. It's a very famous centre for a lot of craft work in Gujarat. It's also unfortunately famous for the earthquake, which some of you may remember in 2001, which was a devastating earthquake and killed nearly about 20,000 people in the area. But its epicenter was on Bhuj itself. But lots of interesting craft work, local embroidery, and a good place to shop for some authentic souvenirs. Take back on your trip. There's a Bhuj Haat, which is a market where lots of the local artisans come to sell their wares. This is a village near Bhuj. This is actually a recent house, part of a rebuilding project after the earthquake's devastation. And some chapatis being made on the fire. And another snack food to have, kuchi dabeli is a speciality of here. It's sort of spicy potato, but sprinkled with pomegranates and peanuts. And this is a palace or a mansion palace, the Aina Mahal nearby. This is the Hall of Mirrors. So this is in Bhuj itself. But Bhuj for us bird watchers, again, is the place we tend to base ourselves, or nearby Bhuj, for the Great Run of Kutch. And the Great Run of Kutch is a huge salt marsh, one of the largest salt deserts in the world. But as well as the barren salt deserts, you also have grassland, the bunny grasslands, fantastic winter bird. It's actually fantastic in the summer as well, although the weather is extremely harsh to spend time there. And also there are some big wetlands in this area. So again, some fantastic birding all around, and a few key birds like this. This is the salt desert. This is the touristy bit that you can do if you want to do a camel trip out on this desert. But this is possibly more interesting for us. This is the bunny grasslands. And part of this, Charidund, there's a big wetland here. So these are great white pelicans, which we get in big flocks. Desert wheatear, a common wheatear you'll find in most of the northwest. And not so common, but the key target bird for this area is grey hypercoleus. Has something in common with the crab plover we talked about earlier, in that, again, it's unique. It's the only member of its family. In fact, it doesn't really need to be called grey hypercoleus. Hypercoleus should be enough. There is only one of them. So it breeds in mostly Iraq and that sort of area, winters in Arabia, and then a few come to northwest India, but almost exclusively some parts of Kutch, and very faithful to the same site year after year. But it's the one place in Kutch that you see it regularly. It's very rarely seen away from that area. Sociable lapwings. We talked about social lapwings in Rajasthan. Again, the bunny grasslands, this area occasionally gets quite big flocks of sociable lapwings. It's a highly threatened bird, where India's wintering areas are extremely important for the global population. White-naped tit, another target bird here. It's found through a lot of Rajasthan and Gujarat in this exact habitat, in thorn scrub, acacia scrub. You can find it, well, not easily, but you should see it if you do a visit to some of this thorn scrub habitat. Elsewhere in India, it's then got a very small population in southern India, in same sort of acacia scrub habitat, but is really scarce, and is obviously a very small population here. So, and that's it. That's all. Its world range is just bits of Gujarat and Rajasthan, mostly small population in southern India. A few interesting mammals to look out for here. Desert jird you'll see quite often, usually running away into their burrows when they hear you coming. Indian foxes, quite common in this area. And desert cat, if you're lucky. So Gujarat, this area of Kutch is a very famous festival, the Ran Utsav, which is a 3 or 4 month long festival of culture and music and food and dance of these regions, and visiting the white sands of the Ran. This tent city where you can stay if you want to be in the middle of a big crowd in the desert, but there's better places to stay if you're a birder. One place worth mentioning is I went here just to explore a bit a few years ago, Dholavira. For those of you who know your historical sites, it's an Indus Valley civilization city, a Harappan city for about 5,000 years old. And it was only discovered about 50 years ago. Some of it's been excavated, but not very much. And it's a pretty impressive place when you think some of this dates back to 5,000 years. And you can wander around the ruins here, and there's no one around. You can almost just wander around on your own through some of these ruins. And it is also quite good birding around here. So things like red-tailed wheatear occurs around here. To get there, you travel over an area that passes through probably the biggest flamingo flocks that you'll find, of like tens or even 100,000 greater flamingos, and not far short of that, numbers of lesser flamingos as well. And you can stay in some nice little traditional style homestay villages. So that was the great Ran of Kutch. Then coming back towards Ahmedabad, we have the little Ran of Kutch, which isn't very little, it's quite big. It's another salt desert area, and it was formed as the wild ass sanctuary, so to protect the Indian wild ass, or kur. Not very far from Ahmedabad. It also has some great birding, so there's a few specialities here. Sykes's nightjar, which you also find in the greater Ran of Kutch. Pallid scops owl winters here most years, and good desert birding generally, so you'll find all the wheatears. This is part of the landscape. Looks a bit barren there, doesn't it? You can do some scanning out there, maybe for a hoopoe lark. You can look for some McQueen's bustards, although most of the birds you find in the little areas of bits or little green patches within this. You can see behind some of the green vegetation here. But you can drive around, cover a bit of ground, and keep scanning. Very good raptors as well. McQueen's bustard is certainly one of the key birds to look for here in the winter. Just a wintering bird, unlike the Great Indian bustard, which I'm not mentioning in this presentation. Actually, Great Indian bustard is almost no longer present in Gujarat. There is a bustard sanctuary which you can visit from Bhuj, but I think the last there was one male I'm not sure the last few years whether the male's been seen or not. So there's a few females, but the bustards we talked about last week, unfortunately, the Gujarat population is almost gone and is pretty much doomed to be gone. Good for raptors, as I said. Peregrines winter here. And with a bit of luck, you can find merlin, which is a scarce bird in northwest India. Hoopalak, as I mentioned, is a key one to be looking for in this area. And short-eared owls, probably the best place in India to see short-eared owl. You can look under. It's a fairly diurnal owl, so it's not entirely nocturnal. You can find them in the late afternoon in particular, but then they spend a lot of the time when they're not actually flying around, just resting under these small bushes, which is undoubtedly what this one was doing. An interesting bird, short-eared owl. It's in years of, it's just a migrant to India. In years that are presumably poor years for lemmings and voles and things further north, that's when they travel further south in search of food, and we get them right. They've been right down to the southern tip of India in some years. And there's the wild ass that we talked about. So again, wild ass is a subspecies that's unique to India. In fact, is unique to the wild ass sanctuary. The Little Run of Kutch doesn't occur anywhere else. There's a few thousand, probably 4,000 or 5,000 of them there. So it's endangered, but it's supposed to be increasing in numbers a bit. So you can find them sometimes outside the sanctuary. And a good one, if you're lucky, is Indian hedgehog, which is actually a sort of desert hedgehog, and is very restricted to the desert parts of Pakistan and neighbouring India. That's the only place you can find Indian hedgehog. Some sites nearby, Little Run of Kutch, is the Sun Temple near Modhera. And it's always good to get close views of birds here. So peacocks in your window. The photographic opportunities are fantastic. Not sure if anyone can work out what that bird is from its silhouette. You can stick a message in the chat if you think you know what it is. Oops, and I gave away a clue there inadvertently. But I'm not sure whether you'll pick up on that one. But yeah, it's super for photography generally in Little Run of Kutch. So just to indulge it this time, I've gone for 2 sunset pictures to finish off. And there's a wild ass in the Little Run. So that's it. That's a whistle-stop tour around Gujarat for you. I hope it's whet your appetite for visiting these places in person. It certainly has for mine. And I hope you've enjoyed that one. Thank you.
Mike, that was brilliant. What a fantastic slideshow it was.
I mean, again, fantastic place to travel, and I think also, see, I travelled years ago around Gujarat with my wife, who's not interested in birds at all. So you see, there's lots of little cultural bits you can add on to a trip in Gujarat to keep non-birding people happy.
Yes, absolutely, and the mix works very well, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, super.
And I just want to, I want to thank the people who put this together, each and every photographer who's contributed to the slideshow, and Salil and Gaurav sitting, over nights to put this together, and you've been sort of helping them put them in the right order. and everybody else. So I'm really pleased to see how beautifully it's been, presented by you and the kind of work that they've done. So thank you very much.
Thank them for putting them together as well. It's great fun sorting out a few pictures for these trips as well. There's so many birds you could include, so we've raced through a few bits, but there's some fantastic birding.
So I'm just going to share a poll with people to know what they think. If you've been to Gujarat before, and I'd like to know which is your favorite place. It's just a game. It's so if you can just sort of participate in the poll, it'll be good to know what you think. And Mike, I want you to talk about, now you're going to be traveling after a few weeks to a whole lot of these places, to Goa or to Rajasthan and to Gujarat as well. So why don't you share your email ID and let people contact you for short trips that you want to do.
Sure. So we did some trips back in November to some of these areas, partly to test how easy it is now with precautions from COVID and how easy traveling is, and we found it very reassuring actually with some of the places we stayed at and some of the precautions we made, and I also felt a bit safer because we're out away from the crowds and traveling in these areas. So doing some of these presentations has whetted our appetite for going to visit some of these places again in person. So through February and March, the plan is to return to some of these areas. So bits of Gujarat that you've seen here, whether it's the coastal areas or the desert areas, Rajasthan from last week, Bharatpur, Himalayas, maybe have a trip over to Kaziranga, which we'll talk about again later. But really, yes, if anyone is keen to visit any of these areas with me over the next couple of months, drop me an email, and I'll just put my email in the chat. But we can discuss some options. So we're keen to do a few trips, small trips, to some of these areas and give some people a little bit of business. There we are. Yeah. So, but we're quite flexible with dates and places a little bit. So if you've got something you'd like to do, somewhere you'd like to drag me off to, maybe Nishant, who's never been to Gujarat, would like to come and join. I see from the chat. So yeah, drop me a message and we can chat about some things.
Fantastic. And I've shared a file here which you can download, and there's some information here which is good food for thought in case if you want to know more about. There are a lot of these little facts that Mike spoke about. So all those facts are there in one sheet which you can download and keep it with you for future reference. It comes to you sometimes. And Mike, the next webinar that we're doing will be of Assam next Thursday. And I'd invite everybody, ladies and gentlemen, please come back next week again to meet Mike for Assam, and it'll be wonderful. Then of course, the following week we'll do something else. But the next one is Assam, so keep your dates marked in your calendar. Yeah. Over to you, Mike, for your big tours as well, which hopefully should start in October.
Yeah, let's hope things clear up. We were looking forward to a fantastic winter of tours this winter, which unfortunately hasn't been able to happen. But yeah, there's various people who've been talking about their trips for next year, and I know lots of people are itching to travel as soon as things open up again. So yes, I think well, because we don't know, we're fairly flexible with places and times, but we're expecting to do a few good trips from October, November onwards. Already got people who are confirmed for doing Kaziranga and Eagle Nest and places in April next year, April 2022. But yes, and something you're wanting to do next winter, do let us know.
Fantastic. So friends, Fareen has posted a link here, which is, which you can click, and then you can join our WhatsApp group or our birding Facebook group to stay abreast with whatever else we're doing. And as we go along, we'll keep bringing more information to you. And Bhavna says that she's got a lovely homestay near Jambu Ghora. So friends, please visit Bhavna's homestay. And Bharat, who has contributed some photos to this presentation as well, runs a beautiful homestay called Epicenter. So, so make use of these, these little opportunities that you get if you're traveling on your own and you want places to stay, you want to meet experts, you want to talk about conservation and species. Go ahead and park yourselves. So these 2 years will never return. And I'm telling you, if you're in India and you can do these short trips, this is your golden opportunity because you don't have to worry about work. Whatever little money is left with you, may as well spend it, and then something will happen. The universe will put more money into your pockets.
See,
Yeah, in India we can live like that, right? We have no problem living off the land.
yeah. Amit was asking a question about zebra finches, which is an interesting one because that's not actually a bird we have in India. So zebra finches are Australian finches, but they look a little bit like avadavats, so maybe a little bit like a red avadavat, but it's not a bird. It's a very common bird in captivity, but it's not a bird that occurs in the wild in India.
So that's fantastic. Mike, I haven't been to Jambu Ghora as yet.
No, I haven't either. So we're going to have to go and see some of Hasib's leopards as well, by the looks of it.
Yes, absolutely. That'll be brilliant. So friends, remember to click on that link that Fareen has just posted and be a part of our birding Facebook group, or you can even join the WhatsApp group here and we'll keep posting more information to you. Some information can be differently put or maybe inane or maybe not so useful because they're all sort of beginners and advanced birders, but don't get people, it's interesting to know that this is their journey and this is our journey. So it's beautiful to listen to their struggles and their challenges as they go along learning more birding, So this is how it is. Mike, you didn't tell anybody what was that in the second last.
I was wondering if anyone would do yes, the silhouetted bird there was a desert wheatear.
So friends, that was a desert wheatear, And if you've got questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat so that Mike can answer them for you.
Yeah, or so we'll put my email there. So if you've got any questions as well, generally about Gujarat or birding and visiting elsewhere in India, I'm very happy to discuss them. As well as, yes, if anyone's keen to do some trip with me over the next few weeks. If you've got time in a few days, let's go somewhere.
Absolutely. And people are saying that they've really found this session informative. They've enjoyed the talk, Mike. So this is, I think, I've lost the count. How many talks we've already done?
4 of these, haven't we?
But we've done earlier ones on Instagram as well.
That's right, we did, yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, what the interesting thing is, it's fun doing these places around different parts of India. But if there's any particular parts of India people would like to know about, again, ask us in the chat or send an email because it's not me putting so much of this together. We've got some of Mohit's good people, Salil and Gaurav in particular, digging out some slides. But it's fun doing some of the research for some of these places as well. So especially the places I don't know quite so well. So if you want to know, as I said, we'll do a SAM. So we'll particularly be covering Kaziranga next week. But if there's any other places in India you'd like to know more about, we can put something together.
And Mr. Badri is asking that he did not hear about Amur falcons in your presentation. So Badri, we will be talking about Amur falcons as we go along. There are many more webinars that we'll be covering. But if you want to say, Mike, if you want to say something about Amur right now, go ahead.
We can. It's not really a very topical word for Gujarat because there's very few records of Amur falcon in Gujarat. So it's really one we should do in Nagaland in particular. But actually, we could cover it a little bit in Assam because Assam gets very large numbers of Amur falcons on migration. The Amur falcon migration is it's worth a webinar on its own, I think, to be honest. We should talk about that. Mm-hmm.
So, Mike, our results are that people love Gir National Park and they're like Great Run of Kutch. And then number 3 is Little Run of Kutch. So we've got some good poll results here. Well, it's it's good to know what
Actually,
people like.
yeah, I didn't mention by name. So on your poll, you have Kijaria Bird Sanctuary. Of course, I only just referred to Jamnagar. So the Jamnagar is the town, really, but there are quite a lot of good wetlands around. Kijaria is the main one. But yes, if I'd mentioned that name, I might have got you a few more points on there, because I think that should be higher than 7%, because it's one of the most spectacular places. If you like large numbers of birds, which I do, I like interesting birds, but I like large numbers of birds as well. So it's always spectacular. So that's a great area. So.
And Smita is saying that she wants to cover GRK, Velagda, Jambugora, Gir. Of course, Smita, we all want to go back there. So you can just join Mike, write to Mike. Mike is going to do a week long, or maybe 10 days or whatever, and he's going to put these casual groups together, fun groups together. Because he wants to travel, I know. So
yeah, I do. I'm sat in back, looking at all these waders pictures that we're doing today, and I'm sat in the place that's about as far from the sea as you can possibly be in India. Yeah. So Bangalore is like slap bang in the middle. But I did find at the weekend Bangalore's first ever dunlin. Which may not be. I'd like to something more insight. As a Brit here, it's not exactly the most exciting wader to find, but it was a great one to find in Bangalore. So.
Yes, and I've been reading a post that you've been disgusted with certain things because you couldn't find them. So, and you should talk about the pipit, that's been so elusive.
Yeah, the red-throated pipit. Yeah, there's a few red-throated pipits around Bangalore, which is an unusual bird in India. So yeah, it's nice. I joke about Bangalore and how I'm in the poorest part of the country for birds because I'm so far from the coast and I'm so far south that we don't get so many migrants. I'm not in the Western Ghats, so I haven't got specialities. But actually, the birding is fantastic. So we had a bird race which is done every year in January a couple of weeks ago, and myself and a team of 3 people just travelling in North Bangalore, so not actually going very far. Saw 165 species in the day in Bangalore. So it's great. It's a really, really nice place, even though it's not on any of our itineraries particularly. We might start our trips in the Western Ghats from Bangalore, but so if anyone's ever doing that and flying into Bangalore, I know a few good local sites.
Yes, absolutely. So be in touch with Mike, and he'll help you with a lot of knowledge related to birds in and around India. And he's a global birder. So Mike, we will also talk about Borneo as we go along, because we want to run trips to Borneo as well, and we want to, and to Cambodia as well. And you've been to both the places. So
Cambodia I've not been to, actually. I've done Borneo. Fantastic though. It's very good. Yeah.
Good. So we through this webinar now, and we've really had a lot of interest and a lot of people have participated. I really want to thank each and every one of you to be here and to have listened to it, Mike, and put in your comments. And we hope to see you again next Thursday. Sign in to the groups so that you stay abreast with all the information that I keep posting. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for making this so successful.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week. Namaste.
Thank you.